Hoo-wee! Y'all in the mood for some drama? Because I've got some hot goss for you that you are not gonna believe. See, ever since a study came out a few years ago detailing how little old-growth forest remains in British Columbia, people have been up in arms, blockading and protesting old-growth logging, with up to 90% of British Columbians demanding immediate protection of old-growth forests. So, in the past few years, the BC NDP has been scrambling to address this issue, and they started by appointing an Oldgrowth Technical Advisory Committee in 2020 to identify the most at-risk, high-productivity old-growth forests remaining in the province for immediate deferrals so they could work to find a way to protect them. All this time, they've put on some pretty showy announcements to try to greenwash people into thinking that old-growth forest was protected and everything's okay, even though these deferrals only apply to about 2% of all the forests in the province and don't actually protect them from logging. They also claim that old-growth logging had fallen to an all-time low, but that turned out to be a lie, and that old-growth logging had actually increased. And then all while these deferrals were being set up, satellite imagery showed that many of these areas were actively being clear-cut logged while discussions on protecting them were still happening. Oh, and then they did make $300 million of conservation financing available to protect that 2% of forests, but that's just a one-time investment intended to last around a decade while they're still actively subsidizing the industry to operate in its usual clear-cutting manner over $365 million every year with your tax money. And when you look at the carbon credits and the hydro subsidies they receive, it's over $5 billion annually. But anyway, I've digressed. The real goss here is that a new leaked map shows that while these top scientists on the advisory panel were picking out the best remaining old-growth forests to protect, the Ministry of Forests was actively undoing all that work, changing the borders on the deferral areas to include more low-productivity forests while making the best forests left in the bioregion available to be logged by industry. You heard that right. The government and industry blatantly working hand in hand behind the people's backs. Ooh, that stings. Now, this map has since been taken offline because, well, obviously it's embarrassing. They were caught red-handed and they're trying to cover their tracks, but the data shows that more than half of the biggest and best forests open to deferrals were selectively removed from those deferral areas so that they could be logged. In other words, despite all the protests, the phone calls, the letters, and the largest single act of civil disobedience in all of Canadian history, the BC NDP smiled to your face and then they lied to you while working behind closed doors with the logging industry to make sure that they could continue logging old growth just as they always had. Job losses in the logging industry have been staggering as the government fails to create any meaningful industry regulations and the paradigm shift that it promised, and as these companies refuse to adapt newer, ecologically and socially sustainable methods on their own. And at the same time, their profits have soared. Canfor and Western Forest Products CEOs took home $2.6 million in 2021, and West Fraser CEO took home over $5 million. Those are individual people, while those working beneath them struggle to pay rent and exist amongst rising inflation, with over 40,000 jobs lost in the industry over the past 2 decades, thanks largely to basically an unregulated export market and advances in technology like feller bunchers and automated mills that cut jobs and costs for those companies. So, the biggest logging companies in the province use scientific data to clear-cut our best forests in a manner that same science shows is the worst way to do it, destroying ecosystems and creating trickle-down effects that impact all of us. Then, they send those logs elsewhere to be milled, closing down mills here and putting people out of work in our communities, and then they go open up new operations elsewhere to make even more money for themselves and their shareholders. And they won't stop until it's all gone and we're left in a dead moonscape of clear cuts with rampant wildfires and ecological collapse that makes sheer existence laughable. And the government doesn't just allow all of this to happen, they blatantly encourage it, all while telling you that they're working hard to protect our forests and protect our jobs. That is some rich, juicy gossip if I've ever heard it. Drama, deception, lies that rival any Jerry Springer episode. But beyond the dark comedy of it all, I just find it so horribly depressing and infuriating. To be mad and upset at this situation is an understatement. We all should be livid. It is so clear that those currently running our government are beyond ethically and morally corrupt as they willfully ignore the demands of the people that they were elected to serve in order to line their pockets and continue to pander to a wealthy, established, power-hungry, colonial capitalist resource extraction industry. This is normally the time in this video where I would encourage you all to take some sort of civil, constructive, democratic action, like calling up BC Premier David Eby at 250-387-1715 and voicing your opinion, as I've been doing for years, but it's clear that he isn't listening. Me telling you to do all the civil, democratic things that we're supposed to do to be heard in this system feels absolutely futile because we were only ever just ignored. This aspect of democracy in Canada is broken. Sure, this one little issue is about logging, but a government that blatantly ignores, lies, and plots behind closed doors with big industry against its people and their future is not a government to be trusted on anything. And ultimately, this does society a disservice because not only do people feel that they can't trust their leaders on an issue, but they can't even speak up to voice their values and be heard. I really try to do all I can to encourage nonviolent forms of protest and communication, to engage civilly in discussions in a democratic manner, but when the people in control still refuse to listen and then bend the rules to serve their needs, then what other options do we have left? Where do we go from here? How do we create change in a system so determined to keep things as they are? Do we vote them out, or is the system too broken for that to even matter? Do we start blockading again, or do we take an entirely different approach altogether? How do we make our voices heard to those who refuse to listen so that we can create the change we need to build healthy, safe, and vibrant future for ourselves, our communities, our children, and the lands we all share together? For me, I think the answer lies in pushing harder, doing more, not doing less, not getting discouraged, and not stopping until we're able to be heard. However that looks like to you, find a way to keep on doing it. And maybe part of that is dreaming of a radical change, a true paradigm shift like the one we were promised, but bigger. The Ministry of Forests has been silent since this news broke, and maybe it should stay that way. Now, I'm just spitballing here, but hear me out. The primary reason the Ministry of Forests exists is to sell the rights to extract forest resources through logging on stolen Indigenous lands to various private and public companies who do so in manners to maximize their profits, and it has proven itself time and time again to be totally untrustworthy, unethical, and a corrupt government sector. But what if we just got rid of that system altogether? What if we closed down and abolished the Ministry of Forests entirely and then returned all those tenures, all of that stolen land to the First Nations whose it was in the first place for them to manage for themselves under the guidance of a new branch that oversaw adherence to regulations for biodiversity and ecological values? Then the government could hold those private and public companies accountable for the situation we're in and all the destruction they've created, fine them appropriately, tax their CEOs, and then use all of that money, plus the now freed up $365 million annually in subsidies to retrain, retool, and recreate a holistic, community-led forestry industry guided by science that isn't driven by greedy capitalist mindsets and functions for the betterment of our communities and our forests, where people can earn good living wages, creating high-value, high-quality wood products in a way that retains the ecological, cultural, community, recreational, and social values of a healthy, functioning forest ecosystem. You would still have industry, you'd still have income and goods being produced to build homes, and the government would still get its taxes. The only difference is that money would flow in a new direction to actually support the nations, the communities, and those doing the work first, with no one person or group of people making mass profits off resource extraction and destruction of stolen lands and communities, with no lobbyists, loopholes, or opportunities for deceptive corruption. That sounds like a pretty dang good way of doing things, right? So why are we stuck in this current model simply because it's the way it's always been? There are a million different things we can do, but we're currently limited by a lack of creativity and desire for that change from those who are in control of it because it threatens their paycheck at our collective expense. So let's dream big and reimagine how we can do things, and let's make some change happen however it needs to happen, because if there's anything that's been made clear from all of this, it's that change isn't needed just in the forestry industry. It's the entire system that needs to change. Maybe we need to change the way the government works for the better, because right now it's not operating in a way that is reflective of the society we want to live in, and that is literally the only reason why government exists in the first place. Personally, that's the direction I'm leaning towards given the state of everything, but I'm only one person in this society that we're all a part of together. So what do you think? Where do you think we should go? What do you think we should do? If you've got any ideas, I'd love to hear them, so feel free to drop a comment, engage in some constructive conversation, and let's find a way to move forward together.